Welcome to Unlocking Your Truth, another podcast by Dr. Leslie Phillips.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and with Corey. And we are broadcasting on 101.7 FM from the University of the Fraser Valley from the unceded territory of the Stolo Nation. Unlocking Your Truth is a talk show about metaphysics and spirituality. And we like to focus on everything in that realm and bring you information that will inspire you to explore your inner world and to unlock your own inner truth. And of course, today is no exception. We have a fabulous guest on the show that I would like to introduce you to in a moment. And she's going to help us inspire you by helping you understand how your body's intelligence is key for unlocking your truth. She's going to share with us some simple techniques that will help us release old patterns that are inhibiting our potential for a vibrant life. So, our guest today, her name is Teresa Campos, and she is a highly accomplished speaker, entrepreneur, guide, and mentor. And she's really here to help all of those seeking a more fulfilled life. She has a program called Your Life's Design that provides those who take that program with insights into the deep-rooted impulses that negatively impede their desires. Her ability to focus her skill as an empath has become very acute over the years. And so she's become an expert in reading the language of the human body's intelligence. And she's learned to identify an individual's biography stored in the cellular memory of their body, and has masterfully combined that skill with astrology to further deepen an understanding of the reasons for the unfolding of the individual's life story. So not only can she decode this for an individual, but she's also applied this intelligence towards her sense of the collective evolution of humanity. And so we are so happy to have you on the show today. Teresa, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Leslie.
And first of all, I'm very curious. So you talk about the body's intelligence. What do you mean by body intelligence?
Well, we all know what intelligence means as it is referred to from the mind, and it's our acquired information and our skills. And so what I have brought forward is, how do we begin to understand the intelligence of the body? And our body has an intelligence system all of its own. And it has everything to do with our subconscious conditioning and the stories, the narratives that we've experienced through our entire life. And those memories are stored into the cellular memory of our body. And so that memory that's held in our body becomes the intelligence system that we work from in making choices and repeating patterns in our life.
Yes.
And
sorry to interrupt. So it's kind of like programming.
Absolutely.
Cells have been programmed. Yeah.
Absolutely. And many times people go about changing and reprogramming themselves from the mental perspective, there is that possibility, and we are able to do that to a degree until we realize that, wait a minute, my life is not making the changes that I want it to make. And that's when we have to go deeper, and we got to go into the body to release the patterns, to identify the patterns first of all.
Right. Well, thank you so much. And what has been your journey to bring you to doing this work?
Well, back in 1992, my mother was really shockingly diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And that came to a shock, of course, to all of the family. And one of the things that came up for me was that my mother had always taken amazing care of herself and her body. And so I began to question the whole connection between how we care for ourselves physically and how we are, and how life brings us these different challenges, and just trying to understand what that all meant. So that took me on a journey of really self-exploration about myself, about the meaning of life. What is life for? What am I here to do? What is the meaning of, all this happening? What can I learn from this? So it just took me down a road of self-exploration. So that's when I started to begin to really investigate the just deeper meanings and just the purpose maybe of what this was here to teach me on a greater level.
And so what was your mother's illness here to teach you? And what was it here to teach her? What did you discover?
Oh, wow. That's a fabulous question. I feel that there's many things that it did teach me, but just as the initial, I think, the initial experience of it was that it was my spiritual awakening. Mm-hmm. And it was that crisis that took me to that. And ovarian cancer being a disease that affects the second chakra was what really got me diving into my personal relationships and looking into what was defined by that. Like, what does that mean? What was entailed in that area of the body that emotionally gets stored there? And so I started looking at my creativity and my mother's creativity and how my mother held herself back in certain areas of her life and how my mother struggled with particular relationships in her life. And it wasn't about any blame or fault to be put on my mother, but it was just where some of her life's lessons were. And I knew, because as we all know, we're all parts of both our mother and father's experiences and consciousness, and what our parents aren't unable to evolve, we then carry that evolutionary consciousness within ourselves. So that's how I then began to say, okay, what do I need to look at that area of my body? And the interesting thing is that is an area where my mother's sisters always struggled with in their body. So there was these red flags telling me to dive deeper.
Mm. And so what was the program that was running that was restricting the creativity in your family that you found?
Yeah, so I went into really looking at the family history, the cultural history, and my mother was a farm worker, and her parents were immigrants. And so I went into the whole belief system of the culture of the Hispanic culture, because that's my heritage on both sides of the family. So I really looked at that and how their sense of struggle as immigrants really, they had to really look at their sense of pride in themselves, how they were perceived by the outside world, and how there was a sense of limitation with what they were able to do and produce in the world based on just the culture itself and what they believed.
So you began this journey kind of in the area of the second chakra, exploring yourself and your own second chakra in that area of your body and the other women in your family and perhaps everyone in your family. And so I imagine that then taught you things that you then applied to the rest of the chakra system and the rest of the body.
Yes.
So how did that happen? I mean, I believe every single human, we're all taking a journey through our chakra system, aren't we? And the way that we do it is kind of unique to each one of us, Some of us may start in the second chakra, some of us may start in the fifth chakra, but through a lifetime, we visit many of those places. And so tell us how that first experience evolved into a system that you now teach and consult with people on.
Yes, thank you. As I dove deep into the second chakra, then I began, of course, to understand all the other parts of the energy systems of the chakra system and how they affected us.
Mm.
And what I learned through, coursework and studying is how those first three chakras are where a lot of the basic survival work is done, right?
Yeah.
And so I worked in those three lower chakras. And that's what I do when I work with clients, is we start in those three lower chakras. We start and we look at that first one, which is self-preservation, and look at the issues around that.
Mm.
And the second one, which is self-gratification, what we allow ourselves to have, our ability to contain joy, our ability to contain abundance in our life. And that was also one of the things in looking at that with my own personal experience, is how there was a limitation. There was like a cap on how much joy, how much abundance that my mother and just the archetype of her family was able to contain.
Mm.
And then going to the third chakra, where we're looking at self-definition, the ego identity.
Mm.
Of how we see ourselves in power, in confidence, and self-esteem.
Yeah.
And I
was just going to validate that. It's such important work, and that focus on the lower three chakras that all have to do with our manifestation in the physical world and physical reality. Because so much in this work, people focus more on the higher chakras, but of course, the lower, you need to have the you need to own your lower chakras in order to be consciously creating the life that you want through the physical body on this planet.
Absolutely. And I think what can happen when we are, some of us who are in this work of, the spiritual work, and we are working in the higher chakras, is that it's easy to lose touch with the physical part of our existence.
Right.
And we are human beings. We may be spiritual beings, but we're having, like they say, a human experience. And in order to bring formless energy to manifest, we have to be able to understand, work, and live in these lower chakras as well, and not live at the effect of them.
Right. Exactly. To be able to be conscious as spirit, and to have spirit directing the physical body and the energy system.
Yes.
Corey's got a question.
Yeah. Well, regardless, the interesting thing is, regardless of whether you're aware or not, you're still manifesting your reality. Like, so people, even though they aren't aware, they're still working with those chakras. They're still creating their environment. They're creating their being. They're creating their connection. It's very interesting. Now, they're not the awareness isn't there, but they're still doing it. So, just a curious question, and I sort of should have come in a little bit earlier. But what was your belief system before you got this awareness? I mean, you went from a belief system governed sort of by your parents and your ancestral understanding, and all of a sudden you changed. You went to a completely different. Did you go to a completely different direction, or were you involved in that type of work before?
No, I was not involved in that type of work. I was not even familiar with it. All this was new information, new language for me. And I had been to Catholic school for 12 years. And and so that's my background with any type of religions or, spirituality. And I had never really understood the whole concept of God, as it was taught to me in that paradigm of religion. And so as I got older, I just no longer had that relationship at all. And it wasn't until this situation with my mother that I asked the question, literally, is there a God? And so that's how it all started to unfold for me, is finding my own answers.
Yeah. How'd you deal with the guilt? Because there must have been guilt. I mean, I came from the same background. And, even today, sometimes I catch myself going, oh, no, that's okay. That's then, this is now.
Yes. Well, you know what? I had to come to a healing with the Catholic Church. And I don't tell this story very often, but I was in Chicago And I was actually doing coursework with Carolyn Mace. I was in a 3-year program with her, and it was a very intense program. And this happened, probably about 8 years after my mother had died, that I started working with Carolyn in the sacred contracts work. And I was out on one of the days just walking around, and I came across a Catholic church. And I love churches. I don't want to be in church, but I love to be in a church. And I decided to walk into the church. And for the first time since school, being a young girl in school, I decided to walk over and make the sign of the cross with the holy water. So I did that. I stepped into the church and Mass was going on. And I thought, oh, great. I just wanted to come into the church. I don't want to sit through Mass. But something said, sit in the pew and just be. And I did. And as I stayed there in church, probably maybe about 20 minutes into church, they began communion. And I had not been to communion in all that time since high school. So I decided to go to communion. And I decided that, you know what, the church doesn't make the rules. I can do communion if I haven't gone to confession. I'm going to make my rule here. And I went up to confession, and I sat back down in the pew, and all of a sudden I was just flooded with emotion and tears. And I just stayed silent with that, and I wasn't sure what that was about. And then I heard this voice said, we were only trying to take care of you. And for me, I felt like that was the essence, the energy, however you want to define that, saying to me, the church saying to me that they were sorry, that they were only trying to take care of me. And it was like I was able to separate all of the personality that I experienced of the Catholic Church and get to the soul nature of really maybe the essence of what it tries to represent.
Yeah. It's interesting because the concept of religion is one thing, and then church, people have a definition of church as a building. And if you talk to any pastoral type of entity, they'll tell you the church is the people, are the people. That's who they are. But yet the building itself, and I'll agree with you 100%. When you walk into a building, a cathedral, a church, I used to go to a spiritualist group, and they met in a 100-year-old church. And all these buildings have an energy. There's an energy there. It's regardless of how we as individuals feel when we walk into that building with our beliefs and things along those lines and desires, the concept of spirituality or the energy of spirituality is in those buildings.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yes. And that's what I felt. That's exactly what I felt.
Okay, thanks for that. That's good.
So it's time for us to go for a break. Listeners, you are tuning into Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and Corey and our guest today, Teresa Campos. We'll be back after these messages. Welcome back, listeners. You're tuning in to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and with Corey and with our guest today, Teresa Campos. And one of the things that we've been talking about is body intelligence and Teresa's work with people and the intrinsic intelligence of their body to help them make changes in their lives and to heal themselves. And so let's dive a bit more deeply into the idea of body intelligence. And because in one way, the word intelligence makes us think about something that is conscious and logical. And yet, my understanding, and chime in if this is incorrect from your perspective, is that with the body's cellular intelligence, it can often be laid down in the physical body pre-verbal, before even the neural networks have formed in the brain to have conscious thought. And so often it's like an underlying program that just happens as a kind of a reaction or course of action that goes online in response to certain things.
Correct. And one of the ways that I like to define it is this is unseen intelligence. This is unseen information. And, you know, our society mainstream is, and even science to some degree, is about what we can see, touch, feel, the five sensory realm. And so this brings in that other sensory realm of what is not seen, the unseen world.
Right. So if somebody comes to you with some kind of issue, give us an idea of what it's like for somebody to experience working with their body's intelligence.
Mm-hmm. So the first thing that I like to do is, you know, of course, they're going to come to me with where they feel stuck, or a story of how there's a repeated pattern in their life, or something that they're trying to work through.
Right.
So then what I do is I begin, of course, to ask questions about it and try to help them identify whether this is coming from one of those three lower chakras, whether it's that self-preservation, gratification, or identification, definition, self-definition. And so in that way, that starts to, you know, hone in on where this particular issue that they're dealing with present time is manifesting. And so then we go into a little bit of the narrative of how maybe, let's say they choose self-gratification, of how either they're holding themselves back from getting something they feel that they don't deserve, or there's some kind of an excessive addiction that's happening. Mm. So then it's traced back that way.
Yeah. So what you've described is very much sort of working with the chakra system. But let's say somebody comes to you and they've got a physical, something that's manifested at the physical level. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you work at the level of the cells of an organ itself? Let's say somebody's got liver disease. Mm-hmm. So you could be working with the chakra that relates to the liver. Yes. You could also be relating to the liver itself and the cells within the liver itself.
Absolutely.
Right.
Because the liver, or let's say diabetes, something like that, that, you know, those different things are going to symbolize something. They're also going to give us more information, more context to what is happening. Absolutely.
Right. So is body intelligence something that you practice as a teacher and healer? Is it something that you teach people to do for themselves? And if you do teach them to do it for themselves, how can they incorporate that consciousness into their everyday lives?
I do. You know, through our work that we do together, then they begin to learn and understand how they can begin to identify that within their body. And then, I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question that you asked me?
Well, how can they use it within their lives? Maybe some examples of.
Yes. So how they can use that is, like I said, is identifying where it is in their body, and then how they can begin to transform that. And it's a release, but it's more of like the energy. My sense of it is the energy feels like it's like when you dissipate something.
Yes.
So because energy is dense.
Yeah.
And then when we're able to bring space to it, we bring presence to it, awareness to it, it begins to break apart, like, you know, a bunch of molecules together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So I always tell them they need to start with the breath, because as we know, trauma, all of our experiences have some form of a breath pattern, an unconscious breath pattern to it. And so when we're able to bring in conscious breath, we begin to dissipate that energy, dislodge the energy.
So it may be a good way to help us understand more deeply what you're talking about. Would you be prepared to share one or two exercises with our listeners so that they can experience it for themselves?
As far as like the breath work?
The breath work, or just one or two techniques that can help them with their own body's intelligence.
Okay.
Whatever you suggest.
Okay, I'm going to bring another one in that could be very helpful for the audience, is that the body also has to know that it is safe and able to release this old pattern. And so that's where I have people begin to form a mantra or have a conversation with their body and letting them know that it is safe to release. And not so much that it's safe to let it go, not just that, but bringing in something that can help identify the wound itself and bring it to a place where it's the opposite, like it's affirming that it's okay, or that you have permission, or I can choose love, or I, whatever that happens to be for the individual.
So is that the technique, or?
Yeah. So let's say, for example, I'll use myself as an example. So I have for me, what my body will go back to is this saying that says, who do you think you are? Okay. And so I will, I'll recognize that as I'm moving through life and I'm getting stuck in this pattern, because it's really going, well, who do you think you are? Who's going to want to listen to you? So I'm doing all this stuff, this talk in my mind. And so what I'll tell my body and what I'll say is that you have a lot of good information to share. You are wanting to be heard. It's okay to be heard, because what it was is that it wasn't okay for me to show up in a particular way that I felt that I wanted to as a child. And so I'm giving myself permission and telling my body. I mean, I say it out loud. I don't say it in my mind. I say it out loud, because there's a different energy vibration to sound versus when we're just having thoughts.
Well, it's more of an actual manifestation.
Absolutely.
Reality.
Absolutely.
So it kind of sounds like you're taking the sort of almost like working in the polarity of whatever somebody brings forward and switching the polarity.
Yes.
To the opposite of what's blocking them.
Yes.
Something that is a support mechanism.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's also, it's not just that we switch it, but we need to go back and understand it, how it's playing out in our life.
And how it got formed in the first place.
Exactly. Yes.
So typically, when you do this work, what's the age range that you find most of these programs, underlying cellular programs, are being laid down?
The age range in which you mean that I actually work with my age group, or when it was formed?
So for example, I may come to you and I might be 50 years old and have a problem. But I might have had that problem since conception, since birth, since I was 3 years old, since I was 10 years old. Is there an age range where much of this programming is the densest that you've picked up on in the work that you do?
Yes, I would say that it's definitely from inception to just our formative years, is high school, and of course it goes on, it continues, but that's definitely where I'm working, is all early childhood conditioning.
Exactly.
Yes,
yeah, that's kind of what I
Yes.
thought you might say. So I'm just going to check how we're doing on our timing, see if it's time for I think we've got maybe time for one more question. So you mentioned that you worked with Caroline Myss, or you learned from her.
Yes.
And she's one of her major teachings is to do with archetypes, isn't it?
Yes.
So does that archetype work come into play with what you're talking about, in terms of maybe it's a particular archetype that characterizes what's not working and moving into an archetype that is working?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, because yes, I do bring the archetypes in, because they help with very much help with giving people another identification to be able to see themselves. And an archetype can also make it a little bit more impersonal. It can be very personal and at the same time impersonal, in terms of, wow, that was my queen archetype. That was the energy of the knight archetype. So it gives a little bit more perspective for people to be able to see that.
Yeah.
And yes, there's times when another archetype can come in and help to alleviate, to help heal the area. But many times it's about looking at the shadow of the archetype and the light of the archetype.
Right.
Yes.
I do some healing as well, and my main modality is matrix energetics, and I work with archetypes quite a bit in a little bit of a different way. However, one of my favorite archetypes that comes in, and it usually makes a healing session very interesting, is Big Bird from Sesame Street. I get some. I also Robin Hood. Robin Hood comes in every once in a while, which is kind of the Errol Flynn version, which is kind of interesting.
Can you tell me what Big Bird, the archetype of Big Bird is?
It changes its relation to the healing itself. Each person that would come up for would be very specific to that person, and it usually has some sort of I don't know how to put it. It has some sort of a meaning within the healing, because what I do is I go back and I look at traumas, whether from earlier on in life, even from pre-lives, from past lives, and so where was I going with that?
Big Bird.
Yeah, I look at the traumas, and Big Bird has most of the time has a caring. There's a caring around it. It's a very lovely, bright, caring what's the characteristics. It brings this wonderful softness into the healing with a touch of humor, which is quite interesting. And then Robin Hood brings a very heroic, but yet unself-centered, a very non-egotistical look at these traumas, and they really do affect the healing itself. And it could be anything from, I've had parrots on shoulders that come in, and the person's going through trauma, and it was actually the spirit of their bird that had come in and sat on their shoulder. It was very interesting when you start working around different aspects of spirituality and tools and concepts. I think archetypes aren't used enough, and sometimes I think they're used. This is my opinion, though. Sometimes I feel that they're used too rigidly, just like sort of like tarot cards. And you do astrology, it's the same thing. I mean, if you're born on this day with this means you're like this, like, and all the people reading the newspapers that are Geminis today are all getting the same generality. I think archetypes are meant to be able to
like
be malleable. They're malleable, yet they have a strength with them. They bring a very interesting level, but to a healing or to a situation.
Well, wonderful. And listeners, you're tuning in to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and Corey, and today's guest, Teresa Campos. We're just going to take a break for some ads, and we'll be back with you momentarily. Welcome back, listeners. You are tuning in to Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and Corey.
Hello again.
And we're having a really fascinating discussion today with our guest, Teresa Campos, about body intelligence. And there's one thing that I'm really keen to ask you about, and we haven't got to it so far, is because we've been talking about that work as it relates specifically to the individual. What about how it relates to mass consciousness and the evolution of humanity?
Ooh, I love it. Yeah, that's a big question. Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I would, okay, give me a moment here to formulate this. That is something that I think that we can all see right now that many of us are struggling with in terms of, you know, different cultural things that are happening. And I do believe that the cultures themselves have an intelligence system, right, of what it is that they are trying to evolve consciousness for itself, for the culture itself.
And they have an underlying program running as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Maybe an unconscious program as well.
Which is many times an unconscious program. Absolutely. So I'm definitely, you know, I definitely relate that to mass consciousness as well. Yes.
Mm. So how does your work that you're doing contribute to the mass awakening of humanity and to a shift in the way that we have our planet that's run, the aspect of the planet that's human, how we have it set up right now? Because I think most of us doing this work agree that we're in a massive shift. We're at a pivot point in the evolution of humankind. It's a huge opportunity for us to change in beneficial ways, but we're also in many ways reaching a crisis point with things. So how does this work? And in a way the answer is obvious, but you know, how does it contribute to the awakening of humanity, and how does it contribute to, let's presuppose that we're agreed upon, maybe we're not, that a lot of the systems on the planet are not really functional. You know, they're not really working for the mass populace. And so maybe you could speak to how this work feeds into those two things.
Yes. So a big part of my work that I do is shadow work. And one of the things that I really, you know, let me put this in a really delicate way, that I came to when us in the United States had our election, is that there was, we were seeing America's shadow.
Yeah.
And I, you know, I believe that everyone was responsible for what we're seeing out there, because we're all, like those of us in the United States, we are United States.
Yes.
And so what we see out there is a reflection of an aspect of self.
Right.
And so I took to heart that reflection I was seeing. And so the work of the body intelligence, it's not new work, but it's work that needs to emerge again.
Right.
Because we need to go deeper with this.
Well, it may not be new work, but human beings are going to places they've never gone before. And one of the places that we're going is deeper into the body, you know, waking up inside the body. We've had many ways of focusing our spiritual nature that don't really focus on nurturing and supporting the body, you know, and that would be the archetype of, I don't know, the monk that separates himself from society and you know, doesn't eat or much and doesn't take care of his body because he's focusing on his spiritual nature.
Right.
Whereas now the mass awakening has to do with having my spiritual nature in my body and taking care of my body and working with my body as a partnership.
Absolutely. And just kind of relating that to the chakra system that might help listeners to have a little bit more of a visual of this, is that we are struggling to move up into the higher chakras as a collective.
Yes.
To live not just from that survival place.
Yes.
And so, because we've been so disassociated with our whole entire being.
Yes. Exactly.
And so that's what I'm hearing you say as well, is like, yes, it may, like I mentioned that it's, you know, it's not old work, but it's new work that needs to be revisited because we are going to this deeper level.
We're taking it to new places.
That's right. That's
and
right.
More people are, I guess more people are waking up than ever before.
Right. Because we're seeing it's not working.
Exactly.
It's not working.
Exactly.
And we are in a time of an awakening in so many ways.
So I also wanted to make sure we got to ask you a little bit about the astrology work that you do. And I know that you're not necessarily an astrologer in the conventional sense that somebody might think of an astrologer. So you're more of an intuitive astrologer, but you also weave in your experience as an astrologer into this work. Can you explain how that works?
Yes. So I do follow the cycles, the collective cycles that are happening for all of us. And through that, I really see the patterns of consciousness that's wanting to evolve. And most recently, we are seeing, for an example, we are seeing the revival of the Me Too movement.
Yeah.
And that is so reflective of, well, it's reflective of a few things, but the one piece I'll highlight, it's reflective of the planet Chiron, which is a very small planetoid. And the planet Chiron is the archetype of the wounded healer. And it is moved out of one energy into another energy, and it's usually typically in a cycle for 8 years. And so now that it's in a fire sign, and it was previously in a water sign, which was the sign of Pisces, and Pisces is the archetype of really the wounded healer. And so, yes, we were diving into our wounds, we were massaging our wounds, we were healing our wounds, and we come into fire and Aries and the warrior and says, and I'm not going to be in those wounds anymore. And then we had the planet Jupiter, which brings expansion and enlarges things. You know, that went into Scorpio last year, and we had this whole movement, this whole really shadow come out of how there was been misconduct in, like, the Harvey Weinstein situation. You know, so all of these are so timely evolutionary pieces of our of how we are here to wake up even more, because we're saying we're not going to no longer live this way.
So let me ask you, I mean, I'm not a trained astrologer at all, but I'm very aware of energy, and of course we're in this particular, it is an astronomical cycle of that 26,000 year cycle completing by 2012, and then we're since 2012, or even before then, I think in the 90s, we've been in this sort of special segment of awakening time. And I feel, and especially this year, 2018, I remember at the beginning of the year saying, whoa, you know, these are the biggest energy shifts we've ever known, and then it's just gone on through the whole year. And from an astrological standpoint, do you see that in what's been going on astrologically, that there are these massive energy shifts that are something that's new and different and introducing new energies to our world?
Yes, I do. I definitely see that. And, you know, as every cycle comes and goes, they are still cycles. And so each cycle brings in a more awareness than the last cycle did.
Right. So you're climbing up the spiral, the energetic spiral.
Yes. And hopefully we are evolving what's happening during the time of the cycle, so we're not having to revisit it on a more difficult, challenging level, because that's what'll happen. You know, we all understand on some level that the universe, life, will continue to give us opportunities to make a different choice.
Right.
All I know is that recently we went through a Mercury retrograde and a full moon at the same time, and my life was miserable for a week. Everything from I washed my cell phone to
he put his cell phone in the washer.
Things just kept happening and happening and happening, and I just hid in my office. I said, "That's it, I'm done."
That's interesting. That's funny because, Mercury is the planet of communication. And so your cell phone, of course, is in the washer. And Mercury retrograde, what happens for me during that time is I really try to become more present with myself. I really try to become more aware of how I have so many distractions in my life. And so it's, during the Mercury retrograde, we are challenged by communication issues, just different things in our life that are making us stop, readjust, look at. And so it's so easy to go into, and not saying this is what you did, Corey, but it's so easy for us to go into victim around it.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
What's wrong? Why are things not working?
That's right.
Instead of taking the opportunity to say, well, I'm getting a break from my normal life, some of the I always think with myself and other people I know, the volume of clients we see goes down during Mercury retrograde. But actually that then gives us a break to focus on other things.
Right.
It's become a real buzzword as well. And even people that don't prescribe to believing in astrology or psychic beliefs, they all like to use Mercury retrograde as an excuse for having a lousy week.
Right. And isn't that interesting how we will attach to something so that we can, it's part of the victim archetype.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we do. And I do hear that a lot. And when I do hear that, I always try to, give another perspective to what this energy is about so we can focus on what it's really here to try to help us do.
Well, and I think introspection, I think it is a good time to, just like you say, to be introspective, to focus on the self. It kind of gives you a break from some of the other things, because some of the other things are not working.
Right.
They normally do.
Right. And it's easy to go into fear and not trust, right?
Yes,
and not trust
absolutely.
Whatever process is, whether for some people will say, oh, I'm selling a house, maybe I shouldn't sell the house, or I shouldn't sign the papers during that time.
Right.
But it is definitely, it can be a time of self reflection.
Mm-hmm.
During a retrograde, just the past retrograde, we couldn't buy a house if we tried.
We were trying to buy a house, actually.
Yeah, we had 2 or 3 we were trying to get in to put offers on, and they just wouldn't let us. It was unbelievable.
Wow.
So if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be.
That's right.
So I want to make sure that we get in talking about your book, because you're just about to have your book published, aren't you, Teresa?
Yes, I'm very excited about that. And my book is called Braving the Self. And it is it is the journey of a spiritual warrior. And this book is a compilation of many blogs that I have written over time. And I'm really excited to be able to put all of these different concepts that I have journaled about and wrote about, blogged about, into one book to help people to bring this information in, and just it's about bringing awareness to different aspects that we tend to lose sight of. Like, for example, one of the first keys, I call them keys in there, is claiming desire. And how often that we forget about or ignore what we truly desire.
That's true.
Yeah.
Especially, I think especially people who are in the healing arts often will put everyone else first.
Right.
And not give to themselves.
Correct. And how I heard one of your other interviews, and the woman was talking about how we have these aspirations or desires as children, and how we lose sight of that. And we, as a child makes, they bring references to things that they want in terms of the only context that they have, which is their child mind of what they desire. But there's an essence to that. There's an underneath to that brings in that desire. And so sometimes tapping back into that can help us to ignite that again inside of us.
Yes, because by the time we're adults, we've programmed over the top of much of that and decided we can't have what we originally thought we wanted. Well, unfortunately, we could go on talking, but we're at the end of the show. And so could you tell our listeners, if they want to find out more about you, how they can do that?
Absolutely. Thank you. So my website is teresacampos.com, and it's TeresaCampos.com. Or you can email me at Teresa at teresacampos.com. Sorry. I was like, wait a minute.
And they can find out about the book on the website as well.
Yes, absolutely. You can.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Teresa, for joining us tonight on our show. And Listeners, you've been tuning into Unlocking Your Truth with Dr. Leslie and Corey and our guest Teresa Campos. And that's the end of the show for today, but we will be here same time next week, 7 o'clock Pacific Standard Time on 101.7 FM.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us. You've been listening to another Unlocking Your Truth podcast by Dr. Leslie Phillips. For more information, go to our website at drlesleyphillips.com. That's drlesleyphillips.com, where you can ask questions or send her an email, and there's many free gifts on there for you as well. You can also find the questions that were asked during this show at the website on our free card reading podcast page, where you'll find a full list of them. Come back again.